Colonel Tim Kirk, my friend and a man whom I admire tremendously, is on the phone with us from Frankfurt, Germany. Now, let me give you just a little bit of background about Colonel Kirk. He was in the trenches in Kabul as the senior Afghan hand for the ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force for the Afghan Army. Essentially, he was at the tip of the spear of the nation building and helping Afghanistan stand up to the Taliban. Now, Colonel, you and I have had many several-hour phone conversations about the issues that face us in Afghanistan. Why don't I just give you a big open-ended question here? What is it that we need to know as we see the last few months particularly being bloody in Afghanistan? What are we fighting for in Afghanistan still today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you very much. First, I'd just like to say the admiration there is mutual, especially the hard-rocking, hard-drumming aspect of your act there. I really enjoy your weekly Facebook jams, and I'm hoping someday that'll be made into an album. I'll be one of the first customers.
Well, hopefully you'll be playing bass on that album too, Tim. When you get back from Frankfurt, man, you and I are going to rock out over some brewskis, my boy.
Roger that. Yeah, and secondly, I'll just say that I'm just calling in, to talk about this very important topic with you, not as a spokesman for ISAF or a spokesman for anyone in the Department of Defense, the Air Force, but just to share some thoughts, because I spent a vast majority of my time working directly with the Afghan people in their language, respecting their culture, and that's, got kind of a different point of view than what you'll hear from a lot of sources. Yeah. And I think it's important, particularly, as you mentioned, because of the recent violence in what has come to be known as the green on blue crisis. And I think that is served as a very effective weapon for our enemies in getting our eye off the ball. And I'd say, your question was what's important to know. Here's really the important takeaway before getting into, any particular spate of violence, is that our enemy knows that he cannot defeat us militarily. He knows he can't defeat us on the physical battlefield, and so he's got to defeat us psychologically. And while every single one of these attacks has a physical manifestation, the fact is that their intended effect is purely psychological. And the concern is that we would fall for that and not pay attention to the psychological intent and rather focus purely on the physical, because the physical consequences are catastrophic. There are real people sacrificing their lives. There are real good guys who are getting cut down in the line of duty, and that's tragic. But again, that's not the point. It's not a war of attrition. All that has a predetermined psychological outcome. And the way we focus on those issues like green on blue is important. For example, this year there's been a huge spike in the number of green on blue events. We've had 34.
Let me interrupt you, Tim, to bring us up to speed on what does that green on blue actually mean? Okay,
green on blue. Green is like the code word nomenclature, not secret or anything like that, but that means our Afghan partners. So, red would be the bad guy, green is the good guy, and blue is us. So blue forces are our guys, green forces are the guys we're partnered with and fighting together with against red. Does that make sense?
Yes, and so what we've seen here recently, although it's not been the predominance of the casualties that we've seen out of there, is we've seen what are supposedly our allies striking against us. When we're up training them, we're supporting them, we are helping them fight their true enemy. And, of course, this is one of the most important things that we need to understand in terms of the difference between us and the Soviet Union. The Afghani people, 90% of them want us there because they realized that their true enemy was or is Pakistan, and that was the same reason why the Taliban came in and took over this nation and why they were so glad to get rid of them. So back to the green on blue violence here. Just pick it up from there, Tim.
Yeah, as I was mentioning, we've had 43 coalition deaths in green on blue attacks this year. And the tendency is to personalize that. Why are our Afghan partners trying to kill us? And that's an important question. But it's not just, that's not the end of the issue. The fact is that there has also been 53 green-on-green deaths. So Afghans killing Afghans at a rate even higher than they're killing the coalition partners. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with culture. Some of it has to do with enemy infiltration. There's a lot of different theories on how that looks and so on and so forth. But the important issue is that it's not that they're picking on the Americans because we're seen as occupiers or whatnot. It is a symptom of a breakdown in trust, however, and that's the important psychological aspect. The breakdown in trust is a very real thing down at the individual level, but it's not what a lot of people think. A lot of people will assume that this breakdown in trust has to do with, the noble tribal Afghan is tired of the American occupiers, and so they've decided to take up their arms and start killing us. Right. The reality is nothing even remotely like that. The trust crisis is really created by the fact that we keep talking about leaving, and the job isn't done. From top to bottom, everyone's thinking about the exit. Everyone's got an eye on the exit, and that drives a breakdown in trust. It doesn't matter what type of partnership you're talking about, whether it's in business or whether it's a marriage relationship. If one partner keeps talking about leaving and can't talk enough about leaving and won't even address the conditions of the reality of the challenges that you're facing, it becomes almost impossible to have a trust relationship. And so that psychological dimension is something that people won't hear a lot about. Instead, there's a lot of talk about numbers, but only half of the equation. The principle is that this is a very violent place. It is a war, and there are issues associated with our ability to work together based on mutual trust. And in a psychological battlefield, the psyche of our partners and of ourselves is really the center of gravity for our enemy, and that's the attack that's going on, and we've got to defend against that.
Well, and you've heard me ask you this question probably a dozen different ways, Colonel, which is, this is the longest war in which America has supposedly ever been in, that whether we be a defending force that's helping stand up the Afghan military so it can stand on its own and defend itself, or whether we are there like we have been for 50 years in South Korea and helping a burgeoning nation emerge into the 21st century. Why is it that we have not been able to train up the Afghan soldiers in a way that they are able to protect themselves against the Taliban forces in Afghanistan that keep coming over the border, that are sponsored by ISI, the same people that have been protecting bin Laden and have been essentially wreaking havoc upon Afghanistan for the last 30 years?
Well, they are able to. That's the other part of the problem. It's the same thing here in the United States where, 5% of the people are getting 80% of the media attention, and that's the jerks and the high-profile celebrities that behave badly and so forth. It's the same thing in Afghanistan. The reality is there are literally tens of thousands of highly trained, highly effective Afghans in the police and in the Army, and they're doing it every day. They're leading missions. They're out there taking the hits. They're delivering the blows to the bad guy. And, some of the most recent examples include the high-profile attacks inside Kabul. When Taliban shooters took over a building and started raining fire in on various parts of the city, it was the Afghan special police who went in there without any command and control from us or any involvement from us. They went in and took care of it, and with minimum loss of life and minimum damage. And there were some real heroes that came out of that. And, of course, they didn't get a whole lot of credit. They didn't get a whole lot of attention because that doesn't necessarily make the headlines. And likewise, there are Afghan special forces, Afghan army units around the country doing great work day in and day out. You just don't hear as much about it. It's not as high profile.
Let me jump in on you here, Colonel, because one of the things that really helped me understand this charade that is being played on the West was a book that you recommended to me earlier this year called Come From the Shadows, Terry Glavin's book. Now, you've also introduced me to several other great books. I always recommend Chris Alexander, the Canadian ambassador to Afghanistan's book, The Long Way Back, as well as Bernard Lewis's book, What Went Wrong and the Crisis of Islam, are also exceptional books. But this book, Terry Glavin's book, Come From the Shadows, its first chapter really describes what he terms Absurdistan, that the picture that is being given to the American people is really an absurd, almost perverted, and particularly untrue version of the Afghani people, but also what we're really fighting against there. The reason why Pakistan will not allow Afghanistan to stand up on her own is because Pakistan wants to go back to the days when they had a Taliban regime, a puppet regime, running Afghanistan as a way of protecting their rear flank against India.
Yeah, that's certainly Chris Alexander, the author of that book. That is argument, and there's a lot of merit to that argument. I can't speak to the geopolitics of it, but I can just tell you that the Afghan people that I spend a majority of my time with certainly are sympathetic to that, and that's what they're concerned about when it comes to us leaving. In their mind, we're holding back the bad guys, and when we leave, everyone there who's gotten an education, all the women who have learned to work and learned home skills and job skills, gained literacy during the past 10 years, all those people will be targets for violence.
Yeah, we see the ISIs targeting the schools that are built there. They don't want any of Afghanistan to move forward and into the world. Colonel, we got 2 minutes left here. What do you think it is that, this is a very tough situation that we're in, and it's true that we're winning as long as we're there, because all they're trying to do is to break our will and send us out. But again, why is it that America should stay and defend our Afghani allies there? Well,
the fact is that we have committed to this. We've committed to fighting against terrorism. We've seen the consequences in the ugly face of unchecked extremism when it comes to terrorist attacks on the global humanity. Doesn't matter what country you're talking about. And that is the heart of the envelope. That's where the bad guys have decided to make their stand. And so it's important for us to be there and keep that pressure on.
Keep rolling. You got a minute, buddy. Oh, looks like we lost Colonel Kirk. Vielen Dank, meine Herren. Tim, I hope you're well there in Frankfurt.